Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Aquarian Insights. Today, I'm very excited to have a dear friend of mine, Tika Caldwell, on with me today. And Tika is a nationally respected designer and healing arts practitioner with over 35 years of experience. And together with her husband, Richard, they have created one of the most important tools in our time in living design technologies, and what I consider the most comprehensive system for environmental energy balancing. And for me personally, living design has been a huge part of my life. It's been a pivotal component of mitigating EMF and sort of the increasing Wi-Fi, cell phone tower emissions, energy balancing my home and also my gardens, and plays a pivotal role in sort of our herbal medicine component of our company. So, Tika, thank you very much for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me, Brendan. It's just a pleasure to get a chance to drop in with you. And I so appreciate your background and all that you love. So let's see what we can discover together and share.
Absolutely. And I think a good place to start for folks is when we're talking about energy medicine, EMF. There's a lot of buzzwords and sort of marketing things out there. And so I think it's important perhaps to define some terms. And really what I want to take a step back first is understand sort of, in your opinion, kind of how our bodies actually work and sort of what is implied in our energy body, because I think if we can understand that a little bit better as a collective, then we can really appreciate why things like EMF and geopathic stress and all of these things actually do affect the system. Because most folks kind of two camps. It's sort of the, it doesn't matter because I can't feel it, or everyone should be super scared of it. And I think the solution's sort of in the middle, and which is why I appreciate living design so much. So perhaps we can kind of start there, sort of what is sort of our energy system and kind of how that relates to our environment.
Beautiful. Well, in very simple terms, what I love to say is when we drop our body and our spirit leaves our body and we're dead, or the body is dead on the floor, what left? Life force and breath. All the blood and guts and meat and cells, and it's all still right there, but something left. And this is spirit. And this is also when we have a heart attack, why sometimes do we get a shock treatment? Because it can bring that voltage back to the body, because the body is also electromagnetic. We
Right.
can understand that, and we also know, or some people are aware of, that the voltage of very healthy cells is a lot more than cancer cells. And so
Right.
there's this thing called life force that is the energy. And in the Western world, we don't get a chance to think about it as much when we grow up and go to school and learn our traditional science and chemistry. It's usually biological, chemical that we're trained to pay attention to. But if we maybe lived in another country where acupuncture, Chinese, Asian cultures or Indian cultures, Ayurveda, they all understand that the body is comprised of energy meridians. And so it's not just the blood and the guts and the cells and the meat and the skin. There's this pulse of electrical energy, electromagnetic energy. And I think that we have a colleague in common, Dr. Tom Cowan, who also talked about the heart is actually not a pump.
Yes. Yeah.
And we know that if we look at people who have the gift of sight, or sometimes in Kirlian photography, we can see that from the center of living matter, the, each cell is creating a toroidal energy field. And so there's a bioelectrical field that surrounds life. And
Yeah, that's
that's,
perfect.
yeah, and this is why when we understand that everything is frequency and vibration, it's just at what rate is the oscillation. And we learn that in chemistry. I mean, I remember early IPS, there's a solid, a liquid, and a gas. And it's
Right.
all the same things, but it's how tightly are the molecules together.
Mhm.
And so it's the density and the electricity or the electromagnetic energy that is coming together in a symphony where it's in resonance or it's in dissonance, and it's depending on a million things.
Yeah, and what I always tell people is, half jokingly, is biochemistry is sort of the superficial truth.
Mhm.
And luckily, we live in a time now where science is, even mainstream science, is sort of catching up to these traditionally spiritual ideas of how sort of the body operates and how we interact with our environment. And so, given that sort of the reality of kind of how the body works, how does stuff like EMF, geopathic stress, all of these sort of energies, how does that affect our body?
Okay, well, let's think about music
Hmm.
and the law of resonance, because all of nature is communicating in invisible or visible sound waves. I mean, invisible or visible light waves, which is a form of energy, or audible or inaudible sound waves. But at the end of the day, whether it's visible light or invisible light, or audible or inaudible sound, it's still energy. It's still frequency, and
Yes.
it's still moving through space. And so in music, we can understand that if you have, say, a very large gong
Mhm.
and you have some other singing bowls next to that gong, if you gong the large gong, the bowls next to it will start vibrating, or water next to it will start vibrating. And, or I'm not a musician, but I understand, so I might botch it, but I think you'll get the concept that if you have a chord in one octave and you strike a chord on a piano, the strings that are in proportion, but on another octave, they will also start vibrating. And we
Yes.
may not hear it, but that vibration and frequency will start to be in resonance. And so when we begin to understand that nature communicates through resonance, it's also kind of when you feel like you're in resonance with a person.
Hmm. Yeah.
You know, and resonance can be the dominating energy in the room, can be one of harmony, or it can be one of tension. And that vibration, that frequency, that energy coming from this being, you can feel it.
Yes.
You can feel it. You can't see it, but you can feel it. And so when we understand that we are living electromagnetic resonant beings, and when we understand that the dominant resonance will bring the weaker resonance into resonance with it, it becomes the law of proportion.
Yeah.
What resonance is the dominant resonance?
Yeah. And I think even in from a neuroscience standpoint, even something like brain entrainment is exactly that. So our
Mm-hmm.
brain waves, our frequencies of our brain waves will eventually become in resonance with the most dominant frequency in the environment. And so when we're thinking about these man-made frequencies that are discordant to human function just for the simple fact of how they propagate and how they move through space. Right now, we're sort of at a cusp of people recognize that it might be a problem, but then everyone goes into, okay, well, I have to mitigate. Obviously, don't hold the cell phone on your head and all of these things. But then the shielding and the clothing and the protective paint and all of these things, to me, are incomplete solutions. Because if we are truly bioenergetic beings and we're being influenced by frequencies, either for good or for bad, there's multiple levels at which we're affected. And so just blocking sort of something from interacting with us doesn't really serve us in being sort of healthy and vital and optimal. Right. And so perhaps you could kind of explain the difference between kind of the technology that you have created versus just sort of simple EMF mitigation techniques.
Certainly. Let's back up for 1 second. And when
Sure.
we talk about resonance, and we can also talk about coherence,
Hmm.
which in music, when things are in a positive resonance, it's orderly and it's structured kind of like Russian nesting dolls. It's
Yeah.
in tune, like a musical instruments can be playing together that are in tune. Or if it's incoherent or it's got a chaotic, it can still have resonance, but it can be a dissonant resonance.
Right.
It's out of phase with the harmony of nature. And both of us learned from one of our teachers, Dr. Kareem, who had a wonderful metaphor that the frequency or the heartbeat or the resonance of nature is like a bicycle. It's
Mhm.
subtle and
Mhm.
it's gentle, but the resonant frequency output of this man-made technology is like a Mack truck. And so it's important to understand volume or
Mhm.
amplitude and the
Mhm.
law of proportion,
Mhm.
because when we have enough of the frequencies of nature in our environment and around us, and we have dissonance, which is natural,
Right.
life is a combination of all of this all the time. The living systems can usually, if the proportions are greater with the harmonic resonance or the magnetic frequencies of life. Now I'm introducing a new concept, but I'll circle back to this.
Mhm.
Nature can adjust and compensate.
Mhm.
But when there's more chaotic resonance at a stronger amplitude coming from multiple places,
Mhm.
then that living system, that the living system struggles, and it will struggle different in different bodies
Yes.
because the struggle tends to go to the weakest link
Yes.
in nature. Whether it's the hemlock trees, I learned from some of the good old boys that the aphids that are attacking the trees are really a result of dehydration. But then we also are learning that increased EMFs is affecting our ability to hydrate.
Right.
And so the secondary problem is the aphids,
Yes.
not the biological problem. That's a
Mhm.
result of dehydration. And so when we can understand that and with the increase of the cell phone towers, we notice that the trees are struggling more. And let's also back up, because we're throwing a few ideas on the table here, but everything is energy
Mhm.
and everything is frequency. Therefore, everything is EMF. Everything is electromagnetic frequencies. We,
Yes. Yeah.
we've come to highlight and refer to EMFs when we're talking about cell phones, Wi-Fi routers, circuit breaker panels, refrigerators, HVAC units, satellite dishes, solar panels, electric cars, and on and on and on, computers. And we think of what we can tangibly identify as EMF producers.
Right.
However, the sun is EMF,
Mhm.
our heartbeat is EMF,
Mhm.
what grows the flowers and brings the life force to healthy water, because healthy water has a bioelectrical life force component,
Yep.
and dead water doesn't. And so when we understand that everything is EMF, and then we can understand that it's the law of proportion, is it EMF that's in resonant and harmony with nature? Or is it EMF that is being created that's in some way robbing Peter to pay Paul?
And to that point, Tika, one of my, just in my personal experience, wearing sort of the protective clothing and the silver lined cloth and stuff is for short periods, if you're going through airports or stuff like that, fine. But any prolonged use of that stuff, it interferes with our own EMF production and decreases health and vitality in individuals. And that was one of the biggest wake-up calls for me when all of that stuff sort of started becoming a thing about 15 years ago, is I don't feel good when I wear that stuff.
Yeah, because it's
And
blocking, it
correct.
blocks both ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that sort of set me on the path of finding solutions that aren't about blocking sort of our own beautiful natural EMF, but how can we sort of synchronize these Mack truck, so to speak, frequencies coming through us and around us. So thank you for explaining that, because I think a lot of folks don't think about that. So
Yes, and to go back to when I used the term magnetic frequencies, we can
mhm,
elaborate a little bit.
mhm,
I worked with one of the top electrical engineers in the world for 3 years, and I learned some scientific language. And in the beginning, with all the different training that I had and understanding in environmental studies and biogeometry and multidimensional integration, neurolinguistic programming, a lot
mhm.
of different things, I didn't have the scientific vocabulary
Right.
to appreciate, and now I do, that what nature provides, that heartbeat and this pulse of nature that comes from a power spot in nature where healing and miracles can occur, that is in the middle of a beautiful rainforest with a spectacular waterfall in a pristine environment, or a beautiful open grace-filled heart, or that glow of a halo that somebody may see around someone who is radiant or enlightened or considered a saint. What are those frequencies? They are those visible and invisible magnetic frequencies. Nature, the life force of nature, is coming from these healthy magnetic frequencies.
Mhm.
The technology that we are working with, and this magnetic term is referring to the way that you were talking about the wave propagates.
Mhm.
Okay, and so nature's wave, if is propagating in a different orientation than our technology.
Mhm.
And so when we have a lot of the healthy magnetic frequencies of nature around us in the right proportion to the electrical propagation, or the vertical propagation of the wave as opposed to the horizontal propagation of the wave, those magnetic frequencies actually act like a magnet. And they can shift and reorient the way that the electrical waves are propagating, that has the ability to do work, because the definition of the ability to do work, or of energy, is the ability to do work, but it's also the ability to create an effect. And so we have our technology that we love, that we're using right now, that's giving us the ability to do work. And it's creating an effect of instant communication. We're connecting. There's many positive things. And through the law of proportion, when we're on a computers too much and we're sitting by the Wi-Fi router, and then the electric meter is on the other side of the wall, and the satellite dish is on the roof, and the cell phone tower is around the corner, and the refrigerator is in the next room, guess what happens? All of that energy and information goes into resonance. Therefore, the dominant resonance will bring the weaker resonance into resonance with it.
Yes.
Which is why we can feel depleted, tired, anxious, maybe not sleeping well, and we don't even really know why. But if we start looking at what's around us, either in invisible, wireless, or wired types of things, we can see, wow, there's a lot that I'm living with in close proximity all the time. And so it tends to raise our tension level. And then that tension begins to lower the voltage of our life force at the cellular level. And it's subtle, but it then can be cumulative over time. And if we're super happy and our heart's wide open and we're in a beautiful place, we may have more voltage and more life force and can transmute more of that. But if we're under financial pressure, we're having health issues, we're working and being a full-time parent, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, study work, and we are already feeling some emotional stress, that other tension is also going to go into resonance with our personal tension. And then that's another compounding way that the voltage of our life force in our cells can be stressed. So what's the antidote? Replicate nature.
Yes.
Bring more of these healthy magnetic frequencies that you find in a beautiful power spot in nature, a healthy tree, an open, grace-filled human heart, a beautiful field of flowers, sunflowers, resonating, being able to face the sun and all their seeds growing in that sacred divine proportion, of the fractal formation to the golden ratio. And when we start bringing these magnetic frequencies of nature and coupling them with the man-made electromagnetic fields, or our body, or adding more to the earth, we are giving the consciousness of nature, of which we are part, and the earth and the environment, more healthy information. And this information acts like a magnet, and it changes the way these electrical waves are propagating, and it makes it sympathetic with living systems without blocking anything. We're transforming.
And I think that's beautiful. And what I've always said is sort of as a clinician, I'm concerned with how stuff works. And I think one of the big conversations with sort of the mitigation aspect is you're just externalizing a problem, but there's no consideration with what X is actually going on in the human being. And so I've tested a whole bunch of different technologies in the office and looking at people's blood, looking at people's autonomic nervous system, looking at people's heart rate, all of these things, because I'm more interested in, well, we have to have technology. None of us are going to run into the jungle in Costa Rica. And so how can we sort of live with it in harmony? And what does that look like in the body? right? And that's why I love the living design technology so much, is because we can use these simple tools in the right way, and our physiology and our biology responds to it instantly most of the time, right? And then we can live sort of in harmony with these things. Now, obviously, I don't think either of us are advocating for a 2-hour cell phone conversation right on your head, but at the same time, tools like this and like living design really, to me, bring back what we've been missing ultimately, is those frequencies from nature, and allow us to recapture so much of what some of us remember, because all of this has been in a very short period of time. And so those of us old enough, we remember what it was like when we didn't have this stuff, and sort of what things felt like. And so now with these tools, usually when I put them in people's homes, or even when people come to our home, the first thing they say is, "Oh my goodness, it feels so calm in here. It feels so relaxing in here. It feels like a home should feel," because you're not getting the impedance from all of the other devices and all of the other things sort of pinging against our biology. And so I think too, you've always said that living design is works with these other things, right? It's not, we're not sort of completely throwing out all of the EMF mitigation practices and the sort of the dirty electricity mitigation. We're working together with that. So perhaps you could speak on that a little bit, of sort of the synergistic relationship between the living design technology and sort of other more commonly utilized things that most people are aware of.
Certainly, thank you. It's come through for so many years. We work with nature the way nature works. Okay, so
Mhm.
we calibrated what has been embedded in our tools, and I'll back up and then I'll get to your point. Let me
Sure.
just say that what's been tested since 2016 at SciTech Lab in Encinitas, California by Dr. Gaetan Chevalier, and as of December 2023, he did tell me that living design technology is the only tools he continues to recommend. And he did state that after many years, similar to you, of testing many different devices and people, every single time they exposed a person to incoherent electromagnetic energy fields, when the living design technology was used correctly, because it's a law of proportion,
Yes.
it restored the energy field of that person back to their baseline or better.
Mhm.
The or better part is the interesting part, because what we've noticed with Kirlian photography, GDV camera, double blind tests that one of the top electrical engineers in the world that I worked with designed for us to do with the Agape Center in New Orleans years ago, and what we've seen with plants is that when we have this full and balanced spectrum of all of the magnetic frequencies common to living systems, that is what is the information that is stabilized in each one of the living design tools. When this information is present, because it's through the law of resonance, changing the way this wavelength of energy is propagating that's coming from the cell phone, it actually creates, it doesn't change the cell phone. It changes the way a living system can interact with it.
Right.
So we're not changing the direct current, we're changing the secondary compression waves, or the P waves, or the torsion waves that are coming off of that direct current. And we're changing the wave propagation so that that incoherent energy actually becomes usable. And we
Yeah.
notice that it actually brings more life force. The aura in the Kirlian photography gets a little more symmetrical and a little stronger, better than when that aura was there without the phone. And we've done it over and over. And what we've seen is that it's playing well together with the technology, where two or more are gathered, and so, but it is the law of proportion. And that's where some intelligence and paying attention to how the tools are applied. Now, in terms of Faraday cages and silver mesh shirts and all of that kind of stuff, yesterday I was energy balancing a home, and they had 2 Faraday cages around each of the Wi-Fi routers that were underneath the desk. They were architectural designers, and they sit there all the time. And in the office was a circuit breaker panel, and outside of the circuit breaker panel was the meter. Now let's remember about the law of resonance. It's not just the Wi-Fi router, not just the large computers in the office. It's not just the circuit breaker panel or the meter. Guess what? That meter is like an acupuncture needle going into the earth. Therefore, it is like a tuning fork resonating the earth energy meridians or grid lines that are traveling through the office. So while the Faraday cage was blocking to some degree the negative effects of the Wi-Fi router, because of all the other incoherent things in the room, the geopathic stress was still out the wazoo. Because blocking we need to think of these energy currents like water. You can dam up a river or whatever, but that water eventually is going to find a way, to go around.
Yes.
And so the geopathic stress, the incoherent energy fields, from the blocking perspective, it might deflect, but it will redirect. It doesn't transform. And so my initial passion was not necessarily working with people, but it was to save the ecosystem, or to rejuvenate and revitalize, and to work with nature the way nature works, because of the water, the bees, and the trees. Because without the web of life, it's not very good. Therefore, for some people, this blocking technology may give an immediate effect, but it doesn't help the ecosystem that is necessary there for us to thrive ultimately. Therefore, when we can use a transformational method that is working with nature the way nature works, that can transform the way that the waves are propagating counter to the way nature does, and we can repolarize it to become healthy, we can have our cake and eat it too, while we are still respecting nature and learning how to continue to transform the technology at its source so it's sympathetic with living systems. So it's a bridge. It's a bridge. And I know that you have worked with electrosensitive people as well as I have. And sometimes, I'd be interested to hear what you have to say, but I notice sometimes people get beyond a certain point when they're electrosensitive, and usually they also have heavy metal, mold, other issues going on at the same time. And so if sometimes they need to feel that block.
Yes.
However, as you were suggesting, it's beneficial but insufficient, because that incoherent resonant field is still going to go around the back door somewhere, or it's going to cut them off from some of the good stuff too, in the way that you were talking about. And so when I'm working with people like this, I'll always say, block and harmonize. Play well together. We don't need to make something wrong to make something right. But when we understand resonance, and we understand the law of proportion, and we understand that we are bioelectromagnetic beings, we can appreciate why we want to seed or entrain our technology to become sympathetic with living systems, regardless of what our nervous system is telling us. Because
Yes.
sometimes our nervous system is not registering the difference between coherent electromagnetic fields or incoherent electromagnetic energy fields, because that switch got a little fried.
Yeah. And you brought up so many beautiful points, but I'll touch on the hypersensitive individuals. And electro hypersensitivity, current guesses, is about 35% of the US population, right? And I've worked with a lot of these folks, and usually the first steps they take are sort of the canopies and the paint and all of those things. And to your point, they absolutely have other things going on, like heavy metals, infections, mold, all of these different things. And that's usually part of their clinical picture. But when they're just in a phase of just blocking things, I've personally found that it will prevent them from getting worse, but it's not the thing that heals them. And once we start introducing some of these harmonizing technologies, it does several things. One, they actually strengthen their own field. And I think on a bigger picture level, it brings sort of a sense of autonomy back. Because a lot of folks who've been struggling with these things, they're scared to leave their house.
Mhm.
And so they know if I, when I start using these things and build up my own energy, build up my own EMF, then I can go to the grocery store, then I can go to wherever I need to go. And in the process of healing, initially they might have, a little bit of extra fatigue or these things, but the more that they harmonize their environment and harmonize themselves, then that's when the true healing happens. And I think you said something that is so important in this whole conversation is I consider ourselves in a very real way stewards for nature, for the environment.
Mhm.
And in an interesting way, it's very selfish to say, okay, all this stuff exists. I'm just going to block it from my little corner of the world. Screw everybody else. Who cares about the bunnies and the bugs and the butterflies and whatever, and my neighbors? I'm just going to do my thing. And that's it's a very man-made thought process that, but in our personal experience, and we're in a semi-residential area, we're not in the middle of nowhere, but once we instilled a lot of the living design tools in our home, in our gardens and everything, that brought back the birds, that brought back the bees. We got rabbits, we got snakes, we got the whole kind of plethora of things. And for us with our medicinal herb garden, we grow too much stuff. We can't handle it. And that's a beautiful problem to have, but this is on a section of land that, we have telephone wires, we have all these other things, we have neighbors. But in harmonizing the environment and essentially bringing nature back to everything, we've had wonderful, wonderful results with all of it. And I think that's just such an important thing for people to consider is if we can bring ourselves and our environment back in line with nature, it not only serves us, but it serves everything around us rather than sort of
That's
having this myopic view of I'm just going to be selfish and protect myself. Right?
that's so beautiful, and this really is the spirit of living design, and it's where, yeah, when I did my first National Outdoor Leadership School course in 1977, when I was a senior in high school. I'm giving you my age. I'm 65. Okay. I've been at this a long time. And my passion and love for the beauty of nature has been what has driven me to do this. And honestly, I have not been doing living design. Living design has been happening to me. And there is a nonlinear component to this, which is love. And it's my love of nature, my love of children, my love of beauty, balance, and harmony that has been the driver. And my fear as a young woman of what I saw happening to our ecosystems and the rivers that I grew up swimming in and the beaches I grew up being next to, and all the industrialization and the decapitation of the canopy and the pollution of the water. And somehow at a very early age, I can remember swimming in the river in Covington, and when I was underwater, I could hear the sound of the motor for the boat that was way down the river coming around the bend, much sooner than if my ears were above the water. And so tuning in to understanding how energy and frequency works and travels through water and travels through air kind of got my attention, and falling in love with crystals. I can remember when I was 8, I found my first rock in Arizona. I'm from Louisiana. They didn't have rocks with crystals. But it's this love of this connection of nature that's been the driver. But this is not just physical. It's multidimensional and it's spiritual. And we are spiritual beings, and the life force that when the egg and the sperm connect, you know, a colleague and friend, Dr. Zach Bush, when he was speaking recently on Gaia TV, he talked about the fact that when the egg and the sperm connect, it creates a light brighter than the sun. And this is EMF. He didn't say it was EMF, but it is electrical, and it's coming from another dimension. Where does this life force come from? And so what is also, in my view, been noted to be comprehensive about living design technology is that some people may be aware and others may not, but we have a body, a mind, and a spirit. And in many disciplines that are more ancient or esoteric, we know there's a mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, astral, causal, and divine plane. And so we are a holographic. Living systems are holographic, and we are multidimensional. And living design is holographic technology. You can break a harmonizer and the whole is still in the parts. It creates this gold energy that is found in this nature, which in spiritual terms is also called love. And part of the function is not only to help maintain, support, and increase, in scientific terms, the voltage that might be depleted so that healing can happen, but to create a harmonic electromagnetic energy field. It is also in people. In the past 2 weeks, 3 people have told me, who have the gift of sight, what they see. And what they told me they see is they see how this technology helps people align this vertical column of light that runs our central channel down through our spine, through our base chakra, and out through the top of our head. And it's very grounding, and it's connecting us to the earth. Some people have seen that it's actually connecting us to the core and to the center of the central sun. And so when we start aligning our energy field and our chakras, in simple terms, it creates more heart-brain coherence. So then we have the freedom to think our own thoughts more. And we also notice that many people become way more physically balanced, because it's not only working with the head and the heart, it's grounding and connecting the root chakra to the earth. So it's creating this bioelectrical connection. And it's not only helping us, but within a 3-foot or 5-foot or 6-foot radius, depending on what tools, you're giving these healthy magnetic frequencies back to the earth, and then it comes back to us. So we get to be in a symbiotic exchange. And that's love. It's resonance. it's not mental. However, it's physical.
Mm-hmm.
And it's bioelectric, and you can see it. But so what I love about living design, and this circles back to one of the questions, we have a lot of other technologies, and in my testing, I notice they may deal with a certain frequency bandwidth, but they might not deal with all the 144 frequencies.
Yeah.
And they may be working in the physical plane, but they may not be working in the astral plane. They may not be
Mm-hmm.
working in the mental or the causal plane, or the divine plane, or the spiritual plane. And what was uncomfortable for me to learn is that these incoherent frequencies are also multidimensional. They're not
Yes.
just in the physical plane. So when we have only a physical solution, it's still beneficial but incomplete. And to this point, we learn that the 144 frequency spectrum of the incoherent frequencies that has the ability to do work, but also creates a side effect, is vibrating in the same frequency as fear,
Mm-hmm.
or in the same frequency as cancer. And so what can happen is if people are agitated, the negative thought forms, or the quote unquote bad energy, can have a tendency to stick around more,
Mm.
because it goes into it and like ants in nature, we have both decomposing and life creating. So spirit to matter and matter to spirit, that this is a natural cycle.
Yeah.
And so if we have a fire pit area and we have ants all around the fire pit, you can put some living design tools, and the ants will probably go find another incoherent spot to do their decomposing. But what it's the problem is that the proportion of this decomposing electromagnetic energy fields is out of balance with natural order. It's not that in and of themselves, the quality of spirit to matter and matter to spirit is unnatural. It's the proportion of the chaotic
Mm.
information that is creating accelerated decomposition,
Yeah.
dehydration, and incoherent electrification.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah,
No,
go
go
on.
ahead. No, go
Well,
ahead.
and so when we combine living design
Mm-hmm.
with many other tools, EES systems, we've energy balanced quite a few of them, Rife machines, Tesla coils, Zyto machines, all these other things that even may be considered beneficial electrical. When living design is combined with that, it transforms the efficacy and the benefit of those tools even more, is what we've noticed. And when living design is combined with like Stetzer filters, ferrite filters, all kind of other tools that people have had, it again, they can have some of the blocking and the transforming, or they can have some things that were partially transforming become full spectrum and multidimensional. So rarely will I tell somebody not to use what they have, because we don't want to compete. We want to cooperate and enhance.
And I think this is all such an important discussion because for me, even if I don't tell folks, ultimately my concern with EMF is the higher levels of their being.
Mhm.
And sure, there's physical consequences, and yes, a lot of the initial precipitation of this happens on sort of the mental level with anxiety and depression and all those things. But using living design is one of the only ways where we can actually get at those higher levels and bring those back in alignment with nature and with where we're supposed to be. Because ultimately, I think if we don't have that, well, then it's just a matter of time before it precipitates down into physical illness or, ill health or all of these things. And that's why I think the living design is so beautiful in recognizing that with the ability for you to assess that and then provide the tools to address that as well.
Well, thank you. And it is beautiful to be able to speak with somebody like you on all these levels at one time, because it's all happening simultaneously in
Right.
reality. In science, we learn how to compartmentalize and we learn
Mhm.
how to section things, but at the end of the day, we're in a unified field of information that is constantly giving and receiving, and who we are and what we think and feel affects our environment, and our environment affects who we are and how we think and feel, because we're one energy system. And
Yeah.
we're also one multi-dimensional energy system. And, some people are aware that they inherit things, and there's the model where we inherit things from a genetic
Mhm.
lineage, but we can also inherit imprints and patterns from an emotional imprint
Yeah.
from the lineage that we come from. And then, I've learned in my studies that there's these 8 primordial cells that we're all born with very, very early on, that hold all this information from many lineages. And in my learning about the energy body that is our etheric body or our spiritual body, that our bones and our skin and the meat and the cells is all kind of glommed onto. It's that part of us that leaves when we are on the
Mhm.
floor dead, but something just left. It, in my understanding and experience, this energy body doesn't die. And so when we are in resonance with this spiritual or spirit or soul aspect of ourselves, and we are cultivating the virtues, not
Mhm.
in my view, but what have traditionally been known, the virtues of compassion and forgiveness and understanding and patience and appreciation and these qualities. It's not a quantity, but it's a quality. And these qualities have been known to be embodied by ascended masters and maybe people who we call wise. And part of the why of living design is so that we can be in a coherent field, so that we can connect to the Mother Earth, of which we are part. We are not separate. To our heart, which is not just a pump. It also retains an incredible amount of memory and information, which is why when heart transplants happen, sometimes the recipient of the heart starts having the memories of
Yes.
the person that the heart came from, which is rather mysterious. And then it can also help connect us to our higher self.
Mhm.
And I believe that in this day and age, it's the divine virtues, and it's connecting the head and the heart and the higher self and the earth, which in simple terms can also be talked about, at least in the language in our culture of living design, is anchoring the grid of golden light.
Mhm.
And when you were talking about geopathic stress before, and can we talk about Mother Earth for a minute and
Yes,
geopathic
please.
stress?
Please.
Well, those energy meridians in Mother Earth are just like the energy meridians in our body that carry the life force and the information.
Mhm.
And what I've grown to understand with another person that we have collaborated with, who's a consummate earth healer, is he has stated that the geopathic stress in cities is so great right now that to try to cultivate the neutrinos or the healthy electromagnetic frequencies from the sun is being disrupted because of the law of resonance, because the earth energy grid lines are in so much resonance with all of the technology in the cities.
Yeah.
And this is a why he loves living design, because he's noticing that when you put our harmonizers in the earth, it's transforming these grid lines. And he says that the invisible beings become elated because they can see the light. And guess what happens with these grid lines? We know that they were identified as geopathic stress by the names of the people who discovered them.
Yes.
But what were they originally? They were the energy veins of Mother Earth. And those veins often hold a resonance with amethyst, citrine, rose quartz, obsidian, copper. And when these grid lines that is the life force in the veins of Mother Earth, just like the rivers and the streams, it's the blood of Mother Earth is the blood inside of us. When we harmonize these energy systems of Mother Earth, it literally goes into resonance with our physicality and begins to transform our chakras and our cells, which then at the fractal level begins to go into resonance with the higher cosmic forces, because everything is fractal. Everything was created from a divine blueprint. And so through the law of resonance of self-similarity, the fact that we are stardust and connected to the stars, or from ashes to ashes and dust to dust, or the same way that the proportion of the knuckles are on our finger to our finger to our hand to our hand to our elbow and our arm to our body, the divine proportion that living systems are made with, or the way the sunflower seeds spiral, or the nautilus spirals, or the pine cone, or the branches around a tree. This is all the divine proportion and geometry of nature. And so when we have the electromagnetic current, spirit coming into matter, flowing through these fractal divine proportions of nature, another colleague who I studied with many years ago said it created a perfected distribution of electromagnetic energy charge. And so nature has a function. The form has function. And so we love to say that living design puts the spin back in. All the straight wires of the pipes, all the straight wires of the electrical lines or the wireless lines, all the 90-degree angles of the buildings, this grid system that we are living in is not self-similar to the nature of geometry that has that fractal geometric harmonic proportion that creates the perfected distribution of electromagnetic energy charge. So when we can put the spin back in by putting this resonant frequency information on a phone, on a computer, on a meter, in the earth, in the garden, we're working with nature the way nature works, multidimensionally, to create grids of golden life supporting light, which in scientific terms is a full and balanced spectrum of all magnetic frequencies common to living systems.
No, that's absolutely beautiful. And I think on the just on the comment on geopathic stress, one of the, and this is just an anecdotal personal experience, but when we first moved into our home that we've been in for a couple of years now, I took all my living design tools and did everything inside the home, and then went outside and did everything outside. And it was interesting, beautiful experience, because once I had placed everything and it was a perfectly clear day, but we have all of the geoengineering and all of that stuff like everywhere. The we just experienced this rainfall for about 15 minutes. And it was the most beautiful crystalline rain that I remember as a child that I haven't seen in, 35 years. And it's just like the whole environment had a nice little sigh of relief and just a thank you. And so since then, we've just experienced a tremendous amount of growth, obviously in the gardens and the trees and everything like that. But that geopathic stress component is a vital missing conversation. And I think one of the interesting things with when we start talking about energy and we start talking about, man-made EMF and all of these, um, as humans, different folks are trying to rationalize different things. So they cut off a section of it and say, this makes sense to me. I'm going to deal with cell phones, or this makes sense. I'm going to deal with this. And to the point that like even some people are like, oh, geopathic stress isn't a thing, or like, who cares about dirty electricity, or who cares about your cell phone? I think that's just all a little bit ridiculous. And one of the beautiful things is with living design is we can address all of these things with just fundamental principles of nature imbued into these tools. And I'm so thankful and grateful to, have these things. So
Yeah, well, it's just a delight to connect with you. And, as we're wrapping up, geopathic stress in all my years of education was the primary thing that I knew was almost the most important thing to address. And
Mhm.
yet it was what I spoke to the least.
Right.
It was kind of like the stepchild of the conversation because it was too much information for most
Mhm.
people.
Mhm.
But now I feel that if the way that I talk about living design now is like if we can do spot harmonizing,
Mhm.
grid setting, and then layering. And spot harmonizing would be like wearing a pendant or putting tools on your phone or in your cell phone case or your computer or maybe your Wi-Fi router. But that spot harmonizing does not address the larger energy envelope through the law of resonance that this whole earth energy system that's running through our homes is here whether we're aware of it or not.
Mhm.
And so the reason why I like to say it's good to set a grid when you can, even if it's around your bed, even if you're a student and you don't want to afford much and you're moving a lot and you're living in your car, to set out your campsite and grid it out, because that grid is saying, okay, I'm staking out my tent. I'm gonna
Mhm.
tie I'm grounding to the earth, and this is the area that we're harmonizing.
Right.
Then when we start applying some of the tools strategically located, whether it's near an electrical outlet or a switch or a fan above or the Wi-Fi router in the room or whatever, we are coupling the tools with the electromagnetic energy field. So it starts to create what I call a rainbow dome around the room or the home or the ecosystem. And with the layering, it's just, if we look at nature, nature doesn't do harmonic proportion on one leaf of one tree, on one branch. It's continuous layering, 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 layering in the sunflower, the nautilus, the pine cone, the pine tree, the leaf, on and on and on and on. So this business of layering the spin,
Mhm.
it's natural. And so this understanding of how we're replicating what nature does and working with nature the way nature works is why appreciating the layering effect over time can be so helpful. And working with the nature, working with the earth, working with the environment, and then just working with the body itself.
No, and that's perfect. And that it really is sort of a complete solution. And I think your delineation between sufficient and optimal is extremely, extremely important for folks to understand. And I'm sure there's a couple folks listening who are semi-savvy to sort of EMFs, and they might have a tri-field meter or something like that. Can you speak to a little bit sort of the difference between a tri-field meter versus sort of what we're measuring and testing when we use living design?
Beautiful. I love this question. A tri-field meter is detecting the presence of an electromagnetic field and the
Mhm,
intensity of it.
mhm,
It does not have it's working strictly on the physical plane.
yeah.
It does not have the ability to discern whether this electromagnetic energy field is coherent,
Mhm,
life supporting, or incoherent, or not life supporting. It's measuring quantity, not quality.
mhm,
Living design is, and it's measuring the direct current.
mhm,
It's not measuring the secondary compression waves happening in the subtle energy field. That is where we learn most of the disruption is coming from. And what do we mean by the secondary compression waves? We can imagine a boat in the water, and we can imagine the wake and the ripple effect in the water. The boat is the direct current, but the wake is the ripple effect. Any electromagnetic energy currents going through the atmosphere or our environment, it's similar to how we can appreciate water. We have the direct current and it's creating the ripple effect. And it's that ripple effect that's really disruptive to us because it's compounded. The tri-field meter does not measure any of this. It simply says, yes, my refrigerator is working. I've got a lot of energy coming out of it. Yes, my cell phone is working. I've got a lot of energy coming out of it. Oh my God, it's an electrical thing. It must be terrible. I need to shut it off, get away from it, move it away from my bed, all these other things. A tri-field meter has a wonderful function sometimes when we're diagnosing where currents are in our
mhm,
world, if we're not
mhm,
already aware of it. Like we can have dirty electricity coming out of something that we might not necessarily be aware of, and it's great for that. However, the tri-field meter cannot measure the presence of coherent energy. And when we apply living design to tools, Dr. Gaetan Chevalier at SciTech Lab decided to use the GDV camera, the
mhm,
gas GDV, gas discharge visualization camera, because he's not testing the electrical current coming off the cell phone. He's testing the bioelectrical field of the living human being and its effect the cell phone is having on the body. And that's the beauty, because they have the ability to test how the body is responding to the incoherent and coherent energy fields. And so we have this research on our website, and there's the Zyto machine can pick up whether or not a body has been exposed to geopathic stress. I've had success with clients who go to a Zyto practitioner. Oh, I've got terrible geopathic stress, and I harmonize my home. Oh, it said I didn't have any more geopathic stress. And so
yeah.
we love it when an electrical device can verify something that's happening at the subtle energy level. And this is one of the big leaps for people to appreciate and understand that we're working on many levels. We're primarily working with subtle energy. If anybody's trained in the art and science of biogeometry, it's a subtle energy testing method based on a science called micro vibrational radiesthesia. And that is the detection and correction of micro vibrations or frequencies. And this was developed before World War II in France. And it's a very engineered, linear, exact way of testing, but it's also working with the subtle energy field. And there are other tools that are helpful, but actually noting and observing the difference, like you have,
Mhm,
at the cellular level of the effect on the biology or the effect on the plants, or with Kirlian photography, we've seen the effect on the aura, which
Yeah.
all of these things cumulatively have given us all the same answers over and over and over and over again.
Right.
And so it's the ability to replicate and looking through different lenses that is helpful for people to understand the benefit and appreciate the benefit, even though the tri-field meter is not necessarily the tool that's going to validate they created the solution when you're using living design.
Yeah, no, and that's a perfect explanation, because that's for folks who've been accustomed to using those, that's one of the questions that sort of we're always fielding. And again, I'm worried about function of the human being,
Mm-hmm.
right? uh, that's where sort of those types of meters fall short. And perhaps eventually, in 20 years, there might be a meter that will be able to measure these things. But
To your
it's,
point,
yeah,
as we're wrapping up, what we've noticed is we do kinesiology testing,
yep.
and many people are much physically stronger and more grounded. And so
Mhm,
what I'll do, some people don't even want to, but I'll say, okay, put your hand on your Wi-Fi router
mhm,
and let me test your strength, either
mhm,
with their fingers with muscle testing of how easy is it them to hold their two fingers together, or putting my fist in their hand and finding their tipping point. And
mhm,
then we'll put the card underneath the Wi-Fi router. And we'll say,
mhm,
now put your hand on the Wi-Fi router, and all of a sudden they become strong.
mhm,
Or we've put your hand on the meter, or put your hand on the refrigerator, or on the circuit breaker panel. And so our friend Craig, who's the CTO of our company, Chief Technology Officer, he's wanting to invent something that will give a readout for a
mhm.
strength test so that it's not subjective,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so that somebody can actually see the amount of weight that they can pick up and the resistance that it takes, say if they're lifting a gallon of water,
Mhm.
with and without the technology, and what is happening. Why is it creating more strength or balance? It's because I feel it's up-leveling the vibrational information for the electromagnetic cellular communication and the voltage, whether it's the mitochondria or the cells or how it's all working. It's just giving another edge. And the brain doesn't understand this. It's that part of us that digests our food and blinks our eyes and grows our hair. And it's that part of us that leaves when our body's on the floor and we've gone, we're dead. It's this consciousness that recognizes this information, and it usually takes it first to the weakest link.
Yeah, and to this point, one of the interesting applications I've used with living design is I work with a number of athletes, just sort of on health and performance and stuff like that. And not only from a health perspective, but from a strength perspective, when they start using the tools, they just like come back, and I'll get interesting phone calls and messages and stuff like, hey, I don't know what's going on, but I'm, 20, 30% stronger now than I was. And those little aches and pains and things like that I had aren't there anymore. And it just speaks to kind of this multidimensional ability of the living design to affect the human system, which I love and I'm a huge fan of. So
Well, in the last thing that I'll take and bring it back to Mother Earth,
yeah.
being a living being, and in the same way that it's affecting the athletes and all that we've talked about,
Mhm.
when we start moving into the regenerative agricultural conversation, just beyond our personal garden, this is one of the areas where I think as we create our collective awareness with people who can understand the benefit of harmonizing large tracts of land,
Mhm.
what it not only can do to help offset some of the chemical biological and electrical or radiation stress, it can also help Gaia create grids of golden light, which then creates more coherence, which then not only helps the plants grow better and people are eating healthier plants, but the consciousness of the people on the land doing the gardening and the people eating the food, and then the ecosystem around the surrounding area. I think it's can be a really exciting and easy way to continue to expand and amplify harmony for our planet.
Yeah, and that's I've always had that in the back of my mind. So if anyone has a herbal farm or even a dairy farm or something like that, either get in contact with Tika or I'd be happy to help out because I think that's such a beautiful thing. And to your point, I work with a lot of farmers, just helping them with different things, but we see a decrease in health in plants and animals anytime new technology comes out, whether it's the Starlink satellites or new 5G or whatever it is, because it's disrupting the ecosystem. And so if we can use living design to, one, prevent that, but then also create more coherence than was originally there to begin with, I think that's just healthier food, healthier animals, and healthier people. And that ultimately is sort of the exciting thing for me. I think that's
And
really
I would love to collaborate with you and anyone else on this. You know, we recently started working with a company that creates bioenergetic fertilizers and also still doing business the old way, but wanting to start educating the people. And so we're moving into this. And what I love is that it's collective. It's not just only about me and my home. You know, it's our ecosystem and how can we come together. And I have a training program that's super easy for people to understand how to apply this. And yeah, I would just be delighted to continue to collaborate with you in any and all ways. It's just a delight to be able to spend time and hear your experience of working with living design. And it's very touching and very meaningful for me.
No, thank you so much, Tika. It's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you and, having these discussions. I guess in closing, sort of, if folks want to get a hold of some of the tools or contact you, what is the best way to do that? How can they find you?
They can go to our website, which is
Mhm.
livingdesigntechnology.com. They can send me an email, which is Tika, Tika, at livingdesigntechnology.com. And yeah, or people can send an email to info@livingdesigntechnology.com. And if they want to send me an email and let me know how they found out about us, it would just be so fun to be able to track how
Oh, yeah.
effective our becoming a team
Yeah.
and having educational conversations together so that we can continue to create some synergy and include you in all the good things.
Yeah. No, fantastic. Thank you so, so much for your time, Tika. I sincerely appreciate it.
Thank you. To be continued.
To be continued. That is correct. I can't wait to have you on again.
Okay. Much
Thank you.
love.